Hello and welcome to Your Free Voice with me, your host, Julia Norton. This podcast is for people who use their voice professionally or for fun, and they want to understand how it works a bit better, or to get over old stories that might be holding them back. Whatever level you're playing at right now, my goal is to bring you lots of actionable stuff from the technical to the creative to the deeply woo to help you free your voice. Hello and welcome back to episode 18. It's close to Halloween. It's a spooky time of year, so I thought, what better time of year than to talk about Jung's shadow work? It's a major part of the voice movement therapy training and has been super helpful for me in working with clients in freeing their voices over the last couple of decades. So I thought I would talk a little bit about why and how I do that and why you might want to try some of it yourself. Shadow is basically the bits that are rejected when we're forming our persona, right? Our mask of what we want to present in the world. As children, we can identify the things that are acceptable in our family, in our environment, and the things that aren't acceptable. And the things that are acceptable get, assimilated into our persona, all nice and shiny and bright, and the other parts are pushed into shadow. If we look at the story of the strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, that is an example of where Robert Louis Stevenson had a dream about that story and brought it to life. Now, shadow material is unconscious, right? It's unconscious, so it's very difficult to access. So often it will appear to us in dreams. That's one major way that it will appear to us is through dreams. So taking your dream material like he did and writing a story about it, writing a song about it, drawing a picture of it, you're helping to bring that unconscious material into the light. Another way to bring unconscious material into the light is to use a technique called active imagination, also a Jungian term. And with active imagination, basically what you're doing is you're dropping into a semi-dream state and then creating art or music or movement, right? And so in voice movement therapy, we do something called the voice movement journey. So you establish a sphere, you're inside the sphere, and in that place you move from a point of impulse. Your eyes are half closed so that the focus is going inward. And you follow the breath and movement and vocalization, not trying to drive it with your conscious mind, but just trying to let things bubble up from the unconscious. And in that unconscious journeying, you can bring forth sounds and characters that you never knew you had. A really, really common experience I've witnessed with clients of mine has been that they make sounds that are stronger, higher, louder than they've ever heard themselves in their lives. And are often, when they come out of it, it's a little bit like snapping out of a dream. Sometimes it can be a little jarring to come out of a voice movement journey. Not always. It depends how we manage it. But there can be this sense of shock of like, who was that? Was making all that sound? And that is the unconscious coming forward in a character. And so when it comes from that place, it's shadow because it's unconscious material. We do voice movement journeys from a conscious place too, but when we're really just letting it come from impulse like that, it tends to be in the realm of active imagination, which is another great way to access shadow subpersonalities. Now, this isn't to say that we're all trying to develop our axe murderer qualities. It's more that when we become conscious of material that is in the unconscious, it's less likely to blurt out in inappropriate situations, road rage, projecting malevolent qualities onto other people, because that's another way of dealing with shadow, is we project onto other people, and generally getting up to no good. So it behooves us to be open to understanding what we have pushed into shadow in the past. And working with dreams is a great way of doing it. If we were just beings of light and just this polished, polite version of ourselves that we want to present to the world, there would be no depth, right? We'd be pretty two-dimensional. So understanding the depths of our shadow is to understand that we're human, right? We are human. We are fully feeling human beings with all kinds of impulses and urges. Doesn't mean we act on them, I might want to behave aggressively towards somebody who cuts me off in traffic. It's possible. But I'm not going to, because I'm a rational human being and I understand it's an impulse. So, why am I talking to you about this? When our voice is restricted, it is very often that the vocal mechanism, the muscles, everything that's involved, the ligaments, are holding on to repressed material. Of course, when the voice is restricted, it's also due to all kinds of physical reasons as well. But the physical reasons often emerge from an emotional cause, right? So if I feel like it's not safe for me to speak out, then my body will naturally try to protect me from speaking out by clenching up, tensing, tightening, diminishing my voice in some way. So if we have unconscious material lurking around that our psyche doesn't want to spill, we're going to clamp down on our vocal expression. So in order to be vocally free, we need to integrate the shadow. I have found that working with shadow material for the last 25 years, it's proved to be not only the most significant growth that I have had as a person, but also the most creative, good, juicy stuff has come out of that. For those of you that might know me from my other podcast, Dark and Twisty Tales, I spent 3 years telling the most grisly old fairy stories from Grimm's and other places, and doing some improvised singing and stuff. I really love to create layered vocal landscapes that are dark and full of dis-ease. That's kind of how I like to create vocally often. So for me, when I'm integrating the shadow, I'm letting all that darkness kind of pour through me at the piano. Now, I don't record a lot of what happens, but when I feel like I am emotionally full, I will sit at the piano and I will just let whatever dissonance wants to come. And I will plonk dissonant chords on the piano and I will sing against it, and I will stretch my voice in all kinds of ways that might be uncomfortable to the ear. And I feel much better afterwards. So that's one way that I deal with shadow. When I'm working with clients, I work with the idea of sub-personalities, which are the mini theatre of selves we have inside us. John Rowan, in his great book, Sub-Personalities, The People Inside Us, I'm sure I've quoted that before, says that adults have, the average adult has 12 to 15 sub-personalities inside them at each time. I'm not talking about a split personality disorder at all. I'm talking about the different fragments of our persona and shadow that are emerging at a given time. You might find yourself, for example, triggered by a family member over the holidays and say something that is uncharacteristically mean or spiteful or small-minded, this is our shadow at play, right? It kicks into a place of old grief and wounds, and it catches us out. So when I'm working with clients, one of the things I like to do when we're working with shadow subpersonalities, so fragments of shadow, is to turn them into fully formed characters. They have a name, adjective to describe them, a sentence or two that they would state in the first person, and the way I work, they would have a song as well, or a piece of heightened text in some way, a poem. When I'm working with clients, I help them to fully articulate this shadow personality. So, and with their voice and their movement and everything about it, and it can be messy and loud and full of snot. There's all kinds of stuff that goes on when we're doing shadow work. But what happens is you become much more conscious of this part of you, right? You become much more conscious of this part of you so that it's much less likely to bamboozle you out of nowhere by you saying stuff where you think, wow, I don't know where that came from. Or that felt a little out of character. I'm not quite sure why I said that, or why did I get so triggered by that? Another way to find out what's in your shadow material, so we've talked about dreams and active imagination, is the idea of being triggered. When you're triggered by a person or an event or a thing, you can sometimes use that as a way of uncovering your own shadow material. So this is my challenge for you on Halloween, is to think to yourself, okay, through no fault of my own, and in fact, it was absolutely my job to do this. As I developed as a child, I had to form my ego and my persona, right, to fit into my family, to fit into my community. And I needed to put things into shadow in order to make that persona polished, right, and fully formed. So it's no fault of our own that we put things into shadow. But as an adult, especially towards midlife, it is a fantastic opportunity, a fantastic time to start to examine what is in shadow. Because I tell you what, it's not just negative traits that go into shadow. We also put stuff that just doesn't fit into our family. So the example that I use a lot is if you have a really athletic, sports-loving family and a child is born into that family who inside actually really wants to sing or be a poet, those aspects of them may be put into shadow because they don't fit in with the family of origin, right? So it may be that in your shadow you have aspects that have been denied because it didn't fit in with your family of origin or your culture. And you might find as you get older that there is a grief there in this unexpressed creativity or athleticism, if that was pushed into shadow. Some people feel that they have to push academic or intellectual curiosity into shadow, or athletic prowess, or sensitivity can be pushed into shadow, or taking up space, being a performer, making room in the world for their stage presence, that can easily be pushed into shadow too. So I invite you to start to try to recall your dreams. Now, if you're lucky enough to have a lovely good night's sleep and wake up naturally, you're usually less likely to remember your dreams because you've moved out of that dream state by the time you wake up. But if you're woken up by a noise, the dog scratching at the door, because you just wake up in the middle of the night, you might have an opportunity to grab some dream fragments and write them down and start just thinking of what it is these dreams are trying to communicate to you. Because our unconscious life is such a huge part of our life, and it doesn't get a lot of airtime due to its nature. You might notice that there are certain kinds of music or art or stories that you really enjoy. And of course, this is a fantastic time of year, this kind of Halloween-y dark time of year, to see what it's like if you've never watched horror films. Maybe try that. See where you get triggered. If you haven't read dark fairy tales, maybe have a listen to some of those. And like I said, it's not all going to be dark, what's in your shadow, at all. It's full of treasure. But some of it might be. And when we're looking at the shadow material there, it's not so much that we're trying to take on these negative, I have in air quotes, qualities, but we're trying to understand what it is we're doing in our daily lives to stop people from thinking that we're like that. If I really don't want to be seen as somebody who needs a lot of attention and to be center stage, because that's in my shadow, then I'm going to play small, right? I'm going to not maybe perform as much as I might. If I'm trying not to be intellectually superior to my family, I might resist further education or studying something really highfalutin and fancy because I don't want to be rejected from my family. So it's more of a question of what are we doing to have people not see us in that way? Yeah, it's complicated, but it's also not. So anyway, that's my little hot take on working with the shadow. Working with the shadow and voice is the most liberating and freeing experience that I have witnessed. We all have shadow. There's no escaping it. In fact, the harder you try and push it down, the more it is going to show up in your life. Also, I haven't talked about this really, but there is collective shadow, the collective unconscious, and that's where we start to get horrific projections of racism and misogyny, and which are just intolerable. And so I think that it's our responsibility as rational humans to investigate our own shadow so we're not throwing it around on everybody else all the time. So how about that? Trick or treat? What's it going to be? Are you going to look at your own shadow so you don't trick somebody else with it? I think that might be a good idea. If you want to read more about the shadow, my very favorite book on it is called Meeting the Shadow, The Hidden Power of the Dark Side of Human Nature, edited by Connie Zweig and Jeremiah Abrams. It's full of fantastic excerpts and essays all about dealing with the nature of the shadow. They also have a book called Romancing the Shadow, which I have read a number of times as well. I'll put links to those books in the show notes, along with John Rowan's subpersonality book. Have a fantastic Halloween, and please rate and review, and see you in the next episode. Bye.